Bivalves are a class of aquatic mollusk. There are approximately 9,000 species around the world, and in New Zealand there are about 7,500. They can live anywhere from deep in the ocean to the shallows, anywhere from the tropics to the Arctic, and there are some freshwater species that live in lakes and rivers. In New Zealand there are 7 freshwater species, 3 of which are freshwater mussels. Bivalves are characterised by a pair of shells, which are actually left and right valves, which enclose their soft body. They don't have a head or a brain, but they do have a nervous system. Bivalves display a great diversity of shell shape and size, ranging from 1 millimetre in length to the metre-long giant clams of the tropical coral reefs. Of the thousands of species worldwide, the majority are only a few millimetres in length. In New Zealand, the largest bivalve is the horse mussel, which can reach 45 centimetres in length. Some familiar species include mussels, oysters, cockles, scallops, freshwater mussels, and pippies. Let's look at the outer structure, starting with this pippy. So you can see this bigger, fatter bit here. This is the umbo. This is the oldest part of any bivalve shell. So bivalve shells grow with the bivalve. So as it gets older, the shell grows outwards, and these are what these growth lines are that you can see. Now if we look down at the umbo, we can see that there's a shorter side and a longer side. The shorter side is the anterior, the longer side is the posterior. So if we look down at the hinge area, which is where it opens and closes, we can see that this is the dorsal side, and on the other side is the ventral. So looking down at the umbo with the anterior towards me and the posterior away, we can see that this is the left valve or the left shell, and this is the right valve. So it opens from the hinge, and you can see on the inside that there's these marks on the shell, one there and one there, and the same on the other side, there and there. And these are actually scars from the adductor muscles. The adductor muscles are the muscles that hold the bivalve shut. This line that you can see here is called the pallial line, and this is actually a scar as well. So this is where the pallial muscle attaches to the shell. Now here you can see the pallial line goes in a bit. This is called the pallial sinus. The pallial sinus here are where the siphons would be. So the siphons suck water in to the bivalve, to the gills where the gas exchange happens. The gills are also used for feeding though. So substrate comes in with the water, for example algae. It filters that out and then pushes the water back out through the out siphon. Now some bivalves siphon the water in, some bivalves such as clams and pippies actually dig into the mud and siphon mud and water in. So here we have a cockle, and on the inside, same as the pippy, you can see the anterior abductor muscles here and the posterior abductor muscles here. The hinge is the ligament here, so it's quite stretchy. It allows it to open and close, and the hinge actually lets it stay open, and it's the adductor muscles that leave these scars here that hold it closed. So when the adductor muscles relax, the hinge allows the bivalve to open. Up close and near the hinge, you can see the teeth. The cardinal teeth are for when the adductor muscles close the bivalve, it helps them to line up and fit together, and also when they fit together it helps the bivalve to survive when predators are trying to open it, because the teeth stop it from being opened by twisting. Instead it has to open up like that. Bivalves such as cockles and pippies, and also scallops, are free moving. Mussels such as this one anchor themselves to rocks using these threads. And these are called byssus threads, otherwise known as the beard of the mussel. Oysters permanently attach themselves to a substrate such as a rock. So this one here, the flatter side would be attached to the substrate, and the more rounded side will be the side that hinges open and closed. So if we look at this one here, you've got the flatter bit, which is moulded to the shape of the rock and is stuck on there. All bivalves have light-sensitive cells that can detect a shadow falling over them. Some bivalves, such as the scallop, even have eyes, which are the blue dots that you can see. Scallops and some other bivalves can actually swim through the water by opening and closing their valves, sucking water in and pushing it out quickly. We're going to look into the internal anatomy of a bivalve. Let's take a look at a dissection of a freshwater mussel. So if you can see on the right, there's the tool, and at the end of it, it's pointing to the adductor muscle. So this is the shorter end, so that's the anterior adductor muscle. And if you look on the shell above it, you can see the scar. And then to the left side of the muscle, the tool is pointing at the posterior adductor muscle. The mantle lobe is now being held up. The mantle lobe is responsible for excreting calciums and proteins which create the shell. The shell consists of 3 layers. The outside layer is called the periostracum, and this is a thin organic layer. The middle layer is called the prismatic layer, and the inner layer is called the nacreous, and that gives the shell the shiny sheen. The dark bit on the mantle is the palleal muscle, which creates the palleal line that we saw before on the shell, which is actually a scar from that muscle attaching itself. The long, thin beige bit that's being held up now are the gills, and they're also on the other side of the valve. We're going to hear a lot more about the gills in a minute. Here's the foot of the bivalve. The foot is a big muscle that the bivalve uses to move around. It can dig into the mud and sand using this foot. The large pale mass between the foot and the gills is called the visceral mass, and this contains the organs such as the liver, stomach, gonads used for reproduction, and the intestine. The small flap that the tool is holding up now is called the labial pulp. Labial meaning lips, there's one on each side. The labial pulp help to push the food collected from the gills into the mouth, which is through this small opening here between the 2 labial pulp. Bivalves such as mussels are incredibly important to our ecosystem. If you take a look at the time lapse, you'll see that there's mussels in the left tank and the right tank is empty. And just by siphoning water into their gills and breathing and feeding, they can have an immense positive impact on the ecosystem around them, especially because of their ability to filter and clean water. Incredibly, a typical mussel filters approximately 360 litres of water every day. When the water is siphoned in, it passes through the bivalve's sieve-like gills and gets pushed out cleaner by the outcurrent siphon. Now the particles that were in the water get caught on the sieve-like gills and go through the digestive system, some of it being used as nutrients and some of it being excreted out to the seafloor. Algal toxins and other contaminants such as metals can concentrate in the bivalve. This is called bioaccumulation. This is not harmful to the bivalve, however it can be poisonous to a creature that eats it. Here's a close-up of the gills. You can see the little yellow dots are particles being trapped on the filaments of the gills, and you can see the gaps between the filaments. That's where the water would just filter through. So the particles are trapped, they then move down the filaments and end up being transported to the mouth via the pulp that we saw earlier in the dissection. Since the particles are trapped, the water that gets siphoned back out is a lot clearer, and you can see from the time lapse, even in a short amount of time, it has a huge effect. This allows for more light penetration and can help aquatic submerged vegetation to grow. Some bivalves, such as mussels, can also create a three-dimensional habitat that fish or other creatures can hide in and live. Looking at the time lapse, you can see what a huge difference the mussels have had in cleaning the water over just 35 minutes. Looking at that first picture again, if you can imagine 360 litres a day with hundreds of mussels, it has a huge clearing effect on the water. Green mussels are commercially farmed in New Zealand, and in 2016 they generated approximately $228 million. In the Marlborough Sounds area alone, there are about 900 million commercially grown mussels that move about 270 million tonnes of water every day. Freshwater bivalves are very important to the ecosystem of our lakes and rivers. They're under threat by pollution and habitat loss. Soft shore beaches and mudflats are a major habitat for many bivalve species and are crucial for ecological health. If they are walled up and stopped being tidal due to sea level rise, many species would not live in that habitat and the ecological web would collapse. Dredging is also destructive to deeper bivalve habitats. Other threats to bivalves include the increase of carbon dioxide absorbed and stored in the ocean, causing it to become more acidic. Pollution, including plastic, is also a problem, with microplastics being found in many New Zealand bivalves. Bivalves can be hermaphroditic, meaning they produce both egg and sperm, or they can have separate sexes. Fertilisation is usually external, where the eggs and sperm are released into the water. The life cycle of bivalves can differ. However, if we look at the difference between marine mussels and freshwater mussels, we can see that marine mussels reproduce by releasing their eggs and sperm into the water. The young then begin life as free-swimming larvae, first as trochophore, then as veliger, then pediveliger, then they settle to the bottom, go through metamorphosis into spat. Then they grow and reattach themselves to a substrate where they grow as juvenile mussels into adult mussels. This is the same method as most marine bivalves. In freshwater mussels, for example New Zealand's kakahi, the male releases the sperm into the water, which then enters the female via the in-current siphon. The eggs are fertilised within the female's body, and the young mussels, known as glycidia, are then released into the water and attach themselves to a passing fish to their gills as a parasite. The parasite then feeds off the fish during their larval stage, then they detach themselves, fall to the bottom, and begin to grow into mature freshwater mussels. Bivalves and other shellfish were incredibly important to Māori living on the coast. The shells were used as fish hooks, among other things, and the seafood was a huge part of their diet. 2 questions to reflect on are: how would it affect the ecology of marine and freshwater habitats if bivalves declined or died out due to human-induced threats? And what could be done to protect, conserve, and restore marine and freshwater bivalves? Thanks for watching.